Hi, and welcome back to Retire Your Way with ILG Financial. My name is Chase Lopez. This is Dave Lopez, and we're both investment advisory representatives for ILG Financial. And today we're going to talk about inflation and specifically how it's going to affect your income in retirement.
Yeah, that can be a big buzzword. For quite a while, there hasn't been inflation, right? For example, inflation from, I think I want to get these numbers right, Chase, from 2000 to 2009, inflation was only about 2.54% a year. From 2010 to 2019, it was only, get this, 1.75% a year. Now that's very low if you want something to compare it to. The historical inflation rate is 3.1%. So you're talking about 20 years of lower than average inflation. So it's easy for folks to forget that inflation can be an issue with your retirement. But starting in 2022, it has crept back. In the 12 months from April of 2021 to 2022, inflation was measured, believe it or not, at over 8%. Now that can hurt, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And just to kind of frame this whole conversation, right? A lot of people hear the word inflation, Dave, and it's really just a buzzword. Sometimes people don't really actually understand what inflation is.
Yeah.
So really what inflation is your dollars, right? Your $1 bill that you have in your pocket yesterday may have been able to buy a candy bar, for example, right? Well, today, now that dollar is actually worth 92 cents. So your buying power is actually lower by 8%, that figure that you
still got the dollar.
Exactly.
So you have this illusion that your money is safe, but if it buys less, it is exactly the same as if you had invested in something and lost 8% of your money. In fact, there's a word for it in our industry. Inflation is called a hidden tax. Imagine it like an 8% tax that's hit you that you don't know anything about. So it can be devastating if it's not planned for.
Yeah, and to your point about the hidden tax thing, right? We're already kind of used to our statements. We get them every month, every quarter, every year, whatever the case may be. And we either see we made money, we saw that we lost money. But with this inflation problem, there's really no way, there's really nowhere where you're going to find that minus 8% on any statement or anything like that, right?
You're right, and it would almost be easier, wouldn't it? If you
Right.
got your bank statement and it said you had $100,000 in the bank last month, you still have $100,000 and maybe you made 1% interest if you're lucky, right? 1% interest, now I'm up to 101, I'm making money, but it would be much easier if the bank statement then said minus $8,800 for inflation, and you're down to 92 or 93,000. Then you would see the reality of what's happening to the dollar. So that's the issue with what inflation is. One of the things we believe, just to let you know, is just like we never believed inflation was going to stay at historically low rates under 3%, remember 3% is historical inflation, we don't think inflation will forever stay at 7, 8, or 9%. But remember, inflation moves like the markets, like everything else. It ebbs and flows like the tides. So you may be in for, when inflation starts to kick in, a several-year window of higher inflation. And depending on where you are in retirement, that can drastically affect you if you haven't built in inflation into your income, savings, and your overall retirement plan. So Chase, what do you do to make sure you've positioned yourself? So since we don't know the future, right? How do you position yourself so that you're not devastated when inflation does hit?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things you can do, right? I would say the first thing is definitely have savings aside for what we call an inflation hedge, right? So if inflation does become a problem, you have extra money on the side to supplement what you're already receiving in retirement as far as income to pay for that extra cost that you've incurred.
Yeah, I go further than that. We build that into plans, don't we? So one of the things you want to do is you would invest that money very differently, knowing it's for 5, 10, or 15 years down the road when your existing income stream isn't quite enough. So you would invest it in a specific way, earmark it as an inflation hedge. And then the beauty of that, what I love about that plan is if you're lucky enough to be in a 20-year window of retirement where you don't have inflation, Okay, great. That's extra money that you can use on trips or fun money or give to the kids. Or if you don't need it, ultimately the kids inherit. So it's a no-lose proposition. But if you have an inflationary environment where your neighbors are cutting things down or having to move to a smaller apartment or this or that, you've built that into the plan. You just access that part of your income plan and you can live the retirement plan you've dreamed of because you've put a strategy in place. It's a great strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, right, from this kind of discussion is so long as you plan for inflation, have some sort of mechanism in place to deal with it, right? Well, then once you get into retirement and inflation does end up happening, now you're not caught off guard and struggling, to your point, right? Having to downsize or whatever the case may be.
You're right. The takeaway from today is inflation will happen sometime in your lifetime. It's part of normal economic activity.
Right.
So just like planning on markets going up and down, you want to plan on an inflationary environment. Now, if you don't have a big extra bucket to set aside for inflation hedge, let's say you're living off your Social Security checks and your pension, and you don't have a lot of extra money that you could set aside for inflation. What do? Well, there's some other things we can do, right? Some of them would be maybe, now that you know this is an issue, you may delay retiring 1 or 2 years and put that entire money set aside for an inflation hedge.
Right.
And that'll also give you an advantage of maybe delaying your pension, which usually results in a bigger pension, and delaying Social Security. The longer you can delay Social Security up to age 70, the bigger the check is, not just when it starts, but for the rest of your life. So delaying retirement a couple years can help. Another way to do it is you can take retirement. A lot of folks do this and love it. And then maybe just work a part-time job for 4 or 5 years.
Right. That might be your inflation hedge, right?
That's your inflation hedge, right? And then the money that you were going to use from savings and pensions can go right into savings for an inflation hedge for 15 years down the road. And, you know, a lot of folks that do that, once they do it, they said, you know what, life is so much more rewarding. I don't know what I was thinking because I didn't have a vision of retirement, but you know, you've never been sitting home for 3, 4, 5, 6 months at a time ever in your life. And a lot of folks, once you get 6 months into retirement, you know, they don't have anything to do and they start to, you know, get depressed or down because we are goal-driven beings.
Right.
So this idea of looking for something to do part-time that you look forward to doing, it may not be your old job, just something you enjoy getting out of bed to do. You know, we've got folks that, you know, love doing Washington Nationals games. They'll like work for the Nationals when they come to town. They love being at the ballpark, right? And they're ushers, and they love it, and they get paid for it. Other folks will go work at Home Depot because they're handymen, and they love it. Those are things you can do. And it's just threefold, right? It gives you extra money. It delays turning on your pension. It delays turning on your Social Security. It's just a win-win for retirement.
Yeah, and it's important for people to know when you delay that Social Security, right, you get an extra 8% added on to that Social Security check for every year that you wait up until 70. So really and truly, that could be your inflation hedge as well, right?
That's wonderful.
Just delaying your Social Security payments. Another thing that and as far as the planning goes, it's really important for folks to realize what their own personal inflation rate is, right?
Well, that's a big one, right? Because we hear the sound bite on the news, don't we? And the one I just gave you, I'm guilty of a sound bite, right? The sound bite, 8 plus 8, what was it, 8.3% inflation for April of 2021 to April of 22.
Right.
But that's not our clients, and that's not your inflation rate, is it, Chase?
Right, exactly. So rough numbers, right? Housing typically is about 25% of folks' monthly expenses, right? But if you own your home, right, and you have a fixed interest rate on your mortgage, well, your monthly payment's locked in. So even if inflation, the CPI number that you were talking about, Dave, even if that's up 8%, you're not seeing a lion's share of that because your monthly housing budget is locked in, right? Conversely, if you're renting, right, that could be a disaster. Inflation could definitely affect you in that type of situation.
Or a variable rate interest rate,
Very true.
right? If you've got a variable rate, when interest rates are at all-time lows, we encourage people to consider the strategy of locking into 15 and 30-year mortgages so the rates never go up again. When interest rates are at all-time highs, we encourage a variable rate. So as they go down, you can take advantage of them. But one of the things, like you said, if you own your own home, you had made a great point. You said the CPI index, and that's just fancy acronym, right, for Consumer Price Index. It's a basket of goods that the American public buys, but you're not buying all the things that are on that list.
Right.
So housing makes up about 25% of most people's budget.
Right.
Another interesting fact is taxes make up about another 25%.
Right.
So you've got about half the money. So if taxes aren't dramatically increasing during that period and you've got a fixed rate, half the money isn't going to have this consumer price index.
Right.
And then there's other little things like the index goes up, shows the price of a new car or a used car, and those are different. But if you've got a car and you're okay with your rust bucket, or you take care of your vehicle, you're saving there. And there's little tidbits you can do at home by just modifying your behavior. Right. If stuff's going up, well, maybe you eat out less, a couple times less each month. Instead of going to Outback because of inflation, you go buy a steak, and even though it's higher, it's half the price when you were eating at Outback than if you were eating at home. So there's a lot of tricks you can do if you don't have a bucket to allocate for an inflation hedge. But I think, and I want your opinion on this, Chase, the takeaway is have a plan. This is a risk that will happen over your retirement. We don't know when, but it's happened historically. It will happen again. It may be happening right now, depending on when you're watching this video. Have a plan, and then if you're not sure how to go about that, find a financial professional who specializes in building out income and retirement plans, and look for guidance, have somebody walk you through it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Dave. So if you all enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button there, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.